Hey, welcome to Arc Studio Presents. I'm Micah Cratty, a WJ screenwriter and the head of writing at Arc Studio, the best screenwriting app in the world. You can check it out at arcstudiopro.com, and there's a link in the description. In a moment, I'm going to bring on Franklin Leonard, the founder and CEO of the Blacklist, to talk about the state of the screenwriting industry, how we got here, what might be coming next, and what you as writers can do about it. Feel free to ask questions on the topic in the chat. I'll try to work in as many of them as I can as we go, work them into the conversation kind of naturally. And then at the end, if we have time, maybe we can do just a little Q&A session and get through as many as we can. Please like this video if you like it, subscribe and turn on notifications if you want to know about future events and videos from Arc Studio. One quick announcement before I bring on Franklin. If you're a screenwriter looking for community and focused writing time, join me and about 100 other screenwriters every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific for Write With Us. We do 3 timed writing sprints, and in between the sprints, I like to answer screenwriting questions. And it's really fun, and it's just a great time to, and a great way to just kind of like focus in on your screenwriting, put away the distractions of your busy life for a minute. You can RSVP for that at arcstudiopro.com/events, and there's also a link for that in the chat. Now, please, without further ado, put your virtual hands together for Franklin Leonard. Hey, Franklin, how you doing?
Well, I'm doing all right. Late in the year, Blacklist, the annual Blacklist will arrive next week, so it's a busy time, but it's good to be here.
That's exciting. Is there like, I imagine just like that hits and there's just kind of like with a thunderous sound.
Well, what I'd say, my experience of it, and I think probably the team's experience of it is that if I could do it all over again, I don't know that I would choose the end of the year, the busiest time of the year, to do the thing that makes us the busiest. Sort of an own goal there. But it's obviously very exciting, and it always is really joyous when it comes out. So yeah, next week.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited to get into this. Just want to say the chat. We love an active chat. If you have things to say, get in there, ask questions. Also, let us know where you are, where you're watching from. It's nice to know that we're not just like, talking out into the void. So LJ Clements is excited for this. I'm feeling the energy from him. So I'd love to see more people in there. But I think a lot of people know who you are from the Blacklist, but I think it would probably be helpful for the sake of this discussion to kind of explain your background and how at the Blacklist you're sort of positioned in the nexus between screenwriters and the rest of the industry, which kind of gives you an insight on some of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, how far should I go back by way of biography?
How about to Leonardo DiCaprio's company, I feel like, is where you often.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, that's where the annual Blacklist started. I think that's sort of what led me to it probably started a lot sooner than that. I grew up in West Central Georgia. My dad was in the Army. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. I was a math nerd, went to college thinking I'd major in math, realized that I was not that good at math relative to people who are actually good at math. Majored in social and political theory, worked on a congressional campaign, then for a management consulting firm, and sort of ran away screaming from all of those jobs and ended up in Hollywood. And when I came to Hollywood, my first job in the industry, I was an assistant in the motion picture lit department of Creative Arts Agency, working for a woman named Rowena Arguelles, who represented a lot of filmmakers who were transitioning from having their first film at a major festival to directing at studios, and writers who were sort of working at all levels of the business. And I think I entered the business thinking that there would be an extraordinary reverence for writers within the business because, no one can do their jobs until a writer does theirs. And these are people who were going into a room alone and sort of literally creating worlds in people and the things that moved us. And I found that not to be the case. Somewhat shocking to me, even still, having been in the business now for 20, coming up on 22 years. And so I was always looking for good material because I thought if I could find good scripts, I saw that like the path to everything else was possible. And that sort of led me from working at CAA to working for a producer named John Goldwyn, and then getting the job at Leonardo DiCaprio's production company, working for a guy named Brad Simpson, who now runs Color Force with Nina Jacobson. They just produced Say Nothing on FX, incredible show. If anybody
needs to watch the pilot,
elite television. But so I was working for him, and my job in working for Leo was to find good material and good writers that could write good material for him to star in. And I was very diligent about reading. I knew that my competitive advantage, if I had one in the business, was going to be that I could read more than most people. Like if I could read social and political theory in college, I could definitely read screenplays. And so I read 20, 25 screenplays a week, and I would literally just sit on my couch with a bunch of screenplays and read them. And I'd come back on Monday morning and my boss would ask me, Brad would ask me, is there anything I should read? And 9 times out of 10, the answer was no, because I needed to be certain that if I walked into his office and slammed a script out on his desk and said, this is our priority now, that it was something that he would read and feel similarly about, or would say, I don't necessarily agree, but I understand why you felt this way. Right?
Taking a step back just real quick, where were those 25 scripts a week coming from for people who aren't familiar with?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, they were coming mainly from agents and managers, right? So at that point, I'm working for arguably the biggest movie star in the world at that point, who happens to be a man between the ages of 25 and 40, right? Like sweet spot. And so I was getting everything, because if they could convince Leo to be interested in the script, you have a go movie. If Leo likes the writer, you can use that to get other interest from other people. And so I was the gatekeeper between those people and Leo.
The keys of the kingdom.
Yeah, I mean, so to speak. It's not like Leo was just going to take my advice. He was going to read the thing and draw his own conclusion. But to get to Leo, I was one of the ways that you could theoretically get to him. Yep. And so everybody was sending me everything. And again, I was trying to be very diligent. I would call everybody back and tell them what I thought of the script and why I wasn't comfortable sharing it or whatever. And, after a year of that, and very rarely finding anything to be super excited about, my mother used to call me every week and ask me if my LSAT scores were still valid. And I really did not want to go to law school. But, one of two things was true at that point. Either my job was to find good screenplays and I was bad at my job, or the job really was to read and pass on screenplays that were not great, in which case I probably needed to find a different job. And so I needed to solve that problem. And that, around this time in 2005, I sent an email to 75 of my peers. Those are 90 of my peers, and asked them to send me a list of their 10 favorite unproduced screenplays. In exchange, I would send them the combined list. Sent that out under a quasi-subversive name, the Blacklist, and that sort of went viral in the industry at a time when internet virality was still a relatively new concept.
Did I was kind of watching videos about when you talked about this before. I was curious, was the Blacklist, did you already have that name when you sent the initial email out? Or what, did you already have thought about what it was going to be at the end? Or when you sent that anonymous email out, I was curious if it was.
That's actually a really good question. I think I had the name when I sent the initial email out, because I want to say it was like the Blacklist at some elder URL, right? So I think I had a name, but it was anonymous, right? It was literally a, hey, I'm asking you for this, in exchange you'll get something else. And a lot of people participated. And and then it was sort of this thing that was shared via email amongst industry professionals and became popular, I think, not because of me or the list, but because the scripts that were on the list were good, right? When people read the stuff that was on the list, they were like, oh, this is actually really good. And I think there's been a virtuous cycle since then, whereby people who are interested in great screenplays read the scripts on the Blacklist every year. The ones that they respond to, they then get involved in, and those things go on to be better movies. And it's really remarkable, the success of them. I mean, I think it's like 300 nominations from 50 wins, 4 Best Pictures and 11 Screenwriting Oscars since 2007. And the thing that I think is most notable, I just want to put a very fine point on this. Harvard Business School did a study on the annual Blacklist right before the pandemic, and found that movies made from scripts in the Blacklist are twice as likely to get made as scripts that are not on the Blacklist, just in terms of normal Hollywood marketplace phenomenon. But more than that, when they do get made, controlling for all other factors, movies made from scripts on the annual Blacklist make 90% more in revenue than movies made from scripts not on the Blacklist. And I want to say 2 things about that. The first is, I didn't make those movies. Didn't produce them, gaff them, didn't do craft service on them. The credit for those films goes to the people who made them. I think what we can take credit for is building a little rudimentary, crude metal detector that finds really strong things that when talented people pour into them, they overperform relative to the other things that are getting made. And the second thing, and definitely the more important thing, is the best business plan is always, always a good story well told. And, that's not me saying that, that's Harvard Business School saying that. And I think that what that means is that writers generally in this business are undervalued. That's why writers had to strike. Because if they were appropriately valued, writers would be getting paid more, but the industry would also be making more money because they'd be optimizing for the thing that really matters, which is the quality of a great script.
Yeah. I'm curious in the sense of, why do you think, because you said you were reading those 25 scripts a week, and
by the way, I also want to be clear, it wasn't 25 a week every week. That would be insane.
Sure,
but there were definitely weeks when it was that high. There were weeks when it was lower. I just don't want to have people thinking that I was out there
no. But I know
there's that good at my job.
There's a never-ending stack, right? As soon as when you finish it, another one's going. And so I guess I'm curious in the sense of why do you think the ones you were reading weren't good, but the ones you were getting emailed about from, the other people were better? Is it just a numbers game and it's kind of harder to find the quality amid the quantity?
Well, no, I think that the ones that I was some of the ones that were on the list were things that I had read during the year, right? I think that's true every year, right? The things that are on the list are things that are circulating, and because people were voting for them, and so somebody is reading them.
Sure.
I think finding all of them that are eliciting that kind of response, or have the potential to elicit that kind of response, is a little bit more challenging, and I think that's really the solution that we have. I'm not going to sit here and say that every single script on the annual Blacklist is a great script. That's a subjective assessment. Right. There are things that I read on the list every year and I'm like, ooh, I disagree with 10 people's opinion, right? The idea of the Blacklist is to gather as many opinions as possible about things, pool everybody's specific knowledge of a set of scripts so that we can all find the things that other people responded really positively to. So it's about increasing the likelihood that you're going to love something, not about saying this is good. And that's why every year at the beginning of the list, it says, this is not a best of list. It is at best a most liked list. And it's just really important that I think people understand that's all it can ever be, but that does have value.
Yeah, I feel like in all top 10 lists and awards, really that's what it can be, because everything is subjective. And
exactly,
when people ask oh, what do you think the best movie of this past year was or whatever, it's I don't know, but I can say what I enjoyed watching, in my experience. And I think you could say certain things, there are elements of quality that certain things can have, but I can't say which one is better, than another.
No, exactly. And I think that's true of movies. There are great films that have really brutal critical reviews. And I think the same thing is true of scripts, right? Just because one person loves it and another person hates it, it doesn't mean that either person is right, as long as both people were good faith actors.
Yeah, totally. So now the Blacklist, it started with that annual list, but there's kind of two sides to it, right? You have the annual list of the screenplays that are voted on by industry members, and then you have the marketplace, and that's kind of probably the part of the business that is most applicable to the majority of aspiring writers.
Yeah.
And can you kind of explain a little bit? I think probably you'll know how that works, but how does if you're just a writer out there, you don't have representation, you have this script, what does the Blacklist do for you?
Yeah, so I think the way to think about it is this. If you're a writer of anything, if you're a writer of screenplays, of television pilots, of theater plays, of novels, you should create a profile on the Blacklist website, which is free. And that's your standard Wikipedia, IMDb page, but that's totally under your control, and it's been built writer specific. And you have your bio, you have your photo, you can list everything that you've ever written in those 4 categories roughly and describe them. Log line, you can tag it in any number of ways, classify it via genre. And that indexes in our database so that anyone on the industry side of the equation, and that's film and television folks, from agency assistants to studio presidents and A-list actors and directors, that's theater companies, that's and now publishing editors and literary agents. If they wake up one morning and say, oh, I'd love to find something like X, they can go in and search for it, and they can find the fact that you wrote something like that. They won't have access to it immediately. They would need to contact you via the website, and there's a free, sort of correspondence opportunity within the website to say, hey, that's interesting. I'd love to read it, right? So now that's a free profile thing that you can create, etc. If you want to make your work immediately downloadable to those industry professionals who are looking for specific things, you can host your work for $30 a month per piece of material, per screenplay, play, pilot, novel. And that makes it immediately downloadable to anyone on the site. And once you have your work hosted on the site, you can pay for feedback. And we've hired readers who are experienced professionals in each of the formats in which we read. So in each of those categories, you have to have at least a year of experience as at least an assistant reading in the format that you will be reading. So if you are a screenplay reader, you need to have worked at a film company and been reading screenplays, same with television pilots, same with plays, and same with publishing. And by the way, if you work at a production company, reading novels for the production company, that does not qualify you for reading for fiction. You need to be reading fiction for fiction's sake. So you can pay for feedback. That varies in price. It's $100 for screenplays and plays. It's $150 for feedback on a 100-page excerpt of your novel. And you get that feedback back. Right now, the average is about 6 days. And when you do, you can choose to make it available to the people on the industry side of the site, or you can keep it hidden and no one ever has to know that you purchased feedback. If the feedback is 8 out of 10 or better, which is roughly 3.5% of the scores that we've given out historically, you get offered free hosting and more free evaluations, potentially in an endless loop. I think so. You get an 8. If one of those 2 evaluations is an 8, you get another 2 evaluations and free hosting, so on and so forth. Once you get 5 8s, we say, okay, we get it, it's good, and we will host it for free for as long as you want to host it on the site, and we'll give it sort of special distinction on the site as having received 5 8s. When you score highly, also, we send an email to all of our industry members, alerting them to the fact that these are the things that scored high in the previous week. And then we also have a number of opportunities that are available on the site at no additional cost. So once you have one piece of feedback on the site, if your work qualifies for any of the opportunities that we have partnered with other companies, you can opt into consideration to those entirely for free. I think in 2022 and 2023, we distributed, I want to say it was $1 million, maybe more than that, to screenwriters. So yeah, so there's a wide variety of opportunities. I know like I sum them all up. I'm trying to sort of speed through them all, but you should check out the website. blcklst.com. It's better explained there.
There's an interesting question here, and I think this is just because I think this is something that screenwriters deal with a lot. And anytime I do events, people always worry about this. Anytime they're putting their work out there in the world, they're afraid of it being stolen, right? If someone's giving them feedback, someone's downloading the script. I have my kind of opinion on this, which I'll share, but I'm curious on what is your opinion on the idea or the fear that a lot of writers have that they put so much of their heart and effort and time into this thing, and they've sweat blood and tears, and now they're afraid of it getting stolen. What would you kind of say to that fear?
Yeah, I mean, I think let me talk about it first in the context outside of the blacklist.
Yeah.
The reality is that when you share your script with anyone in email form, it can be shared with anybody else, and anybody else can do anything with it. I mean, this is a problem that exists in the industry, right? Mm-hmm. I'm sure we've all heard the stories about people printing script pages on red paper so they can't be photocopied. But the reality is, and producers have done this, you can always hire someone to retype something. As long as they can see it, it can be reproduced and shared with somebody else. So there's just really no way to prevent those ideas from being shared. And the other thing is like, you can't really protect an idea. An idea, like a script, is all about the execution of an idea. And if someone finds something, especially in the industry, if you find an execution of an idea that you're really excited about, it is a heck of a lot easier to buy the execution of that idea than it is to try to replicate it and open yourself up to legal risk. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that, generally speaking, it should be a concern of most writers. You are probably not going to get your script stolen. It's far more likely, if somebody is that excited about it, that they are going to buy your script. And if it's your ideas that you're worried about being stolen, it's not something that can really be stolen in the way that I think you're probably thinking about it. Otherwise, sort of the history of art would be a history of stolen ideas, which on some level I think it probably is. In the context of the blacklist, the people who have access to the scripts on our site are people who have been approved by employees of the Blacklist based on their ability and knowledge about this work and ability to actually advance a writer's work. I use this analogy a lot, and there's no disrespect to dentists in Omaha, but if you're a dentist in Omaha who wants to produce movies, I'm sorry, we're not going to give you access to the Blacklist website as an industry professional. You need to be somebody who, in the normal course of your daily work, can make something happen. And that includes assistants, by the way, because as I knew in my experience, if you love something, you can walk into your boss's office and say, you should pay attention to this. And if the boss pays attention to it, things can happen very quickly.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great answer. I think just especially as like an aspiring writer, like the mentality I feel like very much should be you want as many people as possible to read your work. Like what you're in the business of making fans of your work. And so the more people you read it, the more people who are fans, like, and it's scary enough to share your work anyways, because it's a little part of yourself. So you got to kind of have that mindset of getting it out there.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's incredibly well said. And look, I'll be honest, I sympathize. Every time I have to write anything, I've done a little bit of writing for publications, but even if I'm writing like a press release, I feel anxiety about like hitting send on that email. So I can only imagine what it is like to invest hundreds of, if not thousands of hours into telling a story that is deeply personal, or not even deeply personal. It's still deeply personal because you invested the time.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what that is like. And I haven't had that personal experience myself, but I can imagine what it's like. And so I think that it is really important that we treat the work that is submitted to the website with the level of respect that deserves, no matter what we think of the quality of it.
Awesome. All right. I kind of want to move into the main focus here of this conversation. And I want to break it up, I think, into two main sections. First, talking about kind of the larger industry stuff, and then bring it down onto the individual level for screenwriters and kind of like strategies and things they can think about, for their careers. So I think we should start the story kind of in the boom times, peak TV, the content boom leading to 2022, through 22. What was driving that massive growth when it just felt like everything was possible?
I mean, the marketplace was flooded with money is sort of the shortest answer, right? You had Netflix, who was making a ton of stuff and investing a ton of money into film and television. And the studios, especially while everybody was at home because of the pandemic, were rushing to try to keep up. And so they were flooding the zone as well. There were new streaming services being launched. They needed things to be able to stream. And so there were just more things being made, particularly in the television space, and more money to be made by the people who were making it. Inevitably, those times are gone. There's a massive contraction that was happening before the strike, by the way, that was just a reflection of people realizing that maybe you couldn't, continue to show growth to the market with a streaming service that you were pumping full of money and you were, selling for $9.99 a month. And so I think that, there's a contraction that followed that and meant less money and less jobs for everyone.
Yeah. There's also a shift kind of happening in there, which we've seen more ramifications of, which is like the race for subscribers, like that, traditionally there was the viewer and that's what you wanted. And then it became, now you want subscribers. And it turns out that those aren't the same thing in a way, where once someone subscribed, they're sort of less valuable to you because you already have their money. Right. And it's all about new subscribers and the chase for that. And so throwing money at new subscribers as much as possible.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, if you think about it, a traditional studio and a streamer have a very different business model, and they're making money in very different ways. If you're a studio, you're making something, you're taking it to a theater, and every time out, you're trying to sell it. And you're making money on every sale of every ticket. A streaming service's concern is not getting you to leave your house and pay for a ticket. A streaming service concern is to make sure you don't ever think, why am I paying $9.99 for this service? Right? So as long as you don't cancel, they're good with you as an old customer. And they're just trying to get new customers that they can put in that category of, yeah, I'll keep it for another month. And that changes the incentive structure dramatically.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we saw, which people probably felt out there, is it kind of became this thing where like you get two seasons and then you get canceled because the data showed, that after 2 seasons, like a TV series was less powerful at driving new subscribers, and no matter how, like, even if there were a lot of people already watching it, like, so you're kind of getting 2 seasons and then cancellation, then another show and 2 seasons cancellation, and kind of like constantly churning in order to get those new subscribers.
Yeah, and they're just responding to incentives, right? Like their job is to make money. That's what the company exists to do, and that's the most direct path to more money.
Yeah, it's interesting because I see this. I love the mentality here, but there is sometimes this combative feeling towards the streamers and the studios from writers, which is totally understandable. But there's also the other side of that, which is like, we want them to do well. You know, like the better they do, the more money they make, the better it is for everyone. So it's sort of like, how do we help them do well in a way that also helps us do well?
Well, it's not necessarily true that when they do better, writers do better, because just because the pie is getting larger does not mean that the writer's slice is increasing in size. And I think that's where look, in a capitalist society, that is inevitably where the conflict is going to arise. It's how are we dividing up this pie, whatever the size of the pie is. And so I think that's where that tension really comes from.
Yeah, totally. I mean, of course, yeah, I think in general you want the pie to be bigger, because it's like, if the pie gets smaller, they're not going to give you a larger slice of the smaller pie too.
Well, I think that's right, but I also think that we have to sort of really interrogate that question of give, like who can control the power of how the money is distributed, right? And that all of those is about like who has leverage and when. And I actually think that there's some opportunities for writers on that front longer term, but it requires some investment up front from writers. So all of this is a give and take. And the question is strategically, how do you build a future that where there's a bigger pie and a bigger slice for writers of that bigger pie? Sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's big reason we were marching.
No, that's the main reason.
Yeah. So you mentioned this a little bit, kind of, you're talking about like the $9.99 and the access to everything, but like, what went wrong with streaming in a sense? Like, I'm kind of curious, first off, of like why it didn't work, but also, do you think it was foreseeable? Do you think it was like people should have sort of known that like this model wasn't sustainable, or was it unknowable?
Well, I mean, are we sure it didn't work? I mean, some of these companies are still doing pretty well. I mean, Netflix's stock is, if I'm not mistaken, doing all right. So I think the first question is like, what do we mean by didn't work?
Okay, well then I guess let's take a step back then. Like, what is fueling the contraction in your mind if it's not a unsustainable model from streaming?
Well, I think of the studios and streamers as largely oligopolistic, right? There are very few of them, and so when one of them moves, there's sort of a response in kind designed to optimize things. Again, I don't know that it's a sustainable model for everyone. I guess the question is it a sustainable model for one company while other companies have to then adjust, right? Can Netflix survive doing what they do, but will other companies around them have to change their business model to accommodate it? So again, I guess I think the verdict is still out on that. I think the inevitable reality, though, is there's less money in the system, right? At the moment. And that's due to like a lot of things, broader economic shocks, global inflation, right? There's a lot of things that are driving, like on a macroeconomic level, they're driving the economics of the studios. But a large part of it is a shift in the size of the pie away from the people that are making the things and towards the corporations, largely in service of them being able to report numbers to Wall Street that will give them growth, that will drive the stock price up, right? And beyond that, and then additionally, like some corporate consolidation that makes the system even more oligopolistic.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about that particularly because, I mean, obviously one of the big seismic things that happened in recent history is the Warner Brothers Discovery merger, and now you have more talk about mergers after the election. How important of how much of an impact do you think those corporate moves have on the outlook of the industry?
Yeah, I mean, they're significant. Additional consolidation will result in fewer jobs, and will, in all likelihood, result in fewer opportunities and sort of less money on the sort of labor side of the equation, which would make things more difficult for everybody, but writers almost inevitably, especially.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting, like in the timeline of that, because the strikes lined up with the downturn, which has led to some debate on correlation versus causation. Was the strike a reaction to a downturn that was already happening? Did it exacerbate the downturn? What do you think it had? What kind of impact do you think it had on the contraction that we've seen in production post strike?
I think it's possible that the strike very slightly accelerated that contraction. I've seen no evidence making that claim in a compelling way. I think, if anything, the studios are blaming the strikes for a contraction they would have done anyway. And I think the irony, and one that I find most frustrating, is that if the studios specifically would invest more in writers, they would have a larger pie, and their economic situation would not be as bad as it currently is.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting question kind of on that subject. Is part of the problem that there are also so many shows and movies that are too alike because production companies are playing it safe in terms of what they're producing? Do you think, I know you've mentioned in terms of the idea that there's money being left on the table in terms of what kind of stories are being told and who's being able to tell like stories for diverse audiences.
Yeah.
It probably, to some extent, there is money being left on the table.
Oh, I mean, look, if that's the question, are we over investing in stories about, white straight men? Yeah. And by the way, that's not me saying that. That's noted social justice warriors, and that's a joke. Management consulting company, McKinsey & Company. Their conclusion was, and this was sort of studies that were done over the last several years, that the industry is losing $10 billion a year, is being left on the table due to anti-Black bias, another 2 to 4 million a year, or 2 to 4 billion a year being left on the table due to anti-Asian bias, and another 12 to 18 billion due to anti-Latin bias. So that's, let me check my math here, we're looking at like 24 to 30 billion dollars a year that the industry is just leaving on the table because they can't optimize for financial outcomes. They're optimizing for something else.
Yeah. This is kind of a related question on that. How does the creative community push back against, this is kind of saying moving forward, but maybe more of a resistance to diversity in hiring and production post-election, but also kind of the trend that we've already seen historically in leaving that money on the table. What is the response from the creative community, or do you think should be, to those kind of the numbers that you just mentioned?
Well, again, I think the trend line on a lot of these numbers is actually positive. It may adjust from year to year, but the trend line on these is positive. And part of the reason why the trend line is positive is because people want to make money. Now, not all of them realize the best way to make money. A lot of them are sort of distracted by other things, and they're not looking at the actual numbers. But if you are optimizing for your financial outcomes, you will be more diverse than Hollywood currently is, right? And so I reject the assumption that the industry has no choice but to sort of cease all diversity hiring just because of a very close election that changed who is in the White House. If we're making movies for a global audience, not much has changed. And I think it's really important that the people who are making the decisions about what to make, the decisions about what to invest in, look at the numbers and think seriously about servicing a global audience, and not drawing conclusions based on a media narrative that there's very little facts and evidence for.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So I was looking recently at this a report from PredPro. I don't know if you've seen this one, which was talking about how production numbers post 2022, and then they were found that like recently in Q3, the third quarter of 2024, things are still down. there is some stabilization and growth happening, and feels like there are some green shoots. But one of the things they found in that report, there was like a difference between the rebound in film and TV. That in film there's been more of a rebound, and that in TV it's been harder, particularly with the cutbacks in cable and network TV, and the loss of the CW. Do you think that there will be a more general rebound, or that it'll kind of be a little more hit and miss, more recovery in some areas and less in other areas?
But are you asking specifically about production in like LA in the US, or are you asking about just like an investment in development and writing?
Just in the more. I mean, this report was on like in production. Those were the numbers they were looking at, like what shows and movies were being produced, and they were saying that more films are being produced now relative to TV shows. It seems like the recovery is happening a little bit more, and maybe it's not. We can take a step back if it hasn't felt like that. But.
Well, no, I think it's important to remember though that like the sort of the priority of the industry between film and television has always sort of shifted back and forth, right? Like when I started in the industry 22 years ago, like film was definitely on the top of the mountain. And over the course of the 2 decades that followed, that shifted quite a bit. TV became the place that was sort of moving cultural moments. There was Game of Thrones, there was Succession. Like people, like I saw a lot of my peers transition from being film executives to being television executives. And there were a lot of writers who had started as film writers who transitioned to television. And that was because there was so much money in the system. There were jobs available. And there was a cultural cachet that hadn't been there for TV in the way that there had been for film. I think that as part of this contraction of television, that is contracting quite radically. And we're starting to see evidence that like, hey, maybe people do go to the theater. Like, and I think it's important to remember also, like, we collectively lived through a global pandemic that radically changed the way in which we lived our lives, right? So it was always going to take some amount of time for us to recover from just the fact that we went from going to the movies to not wanting to be around people in enclosed spaces at all. And that is going to change behavior, and you got to lure people back with things that they find compelling. And that's going to take some time to readjust and invite people back to having those social experiences, when for a serious period of time that you were worried about dying if you made that choice.
I'm curious, and I don't know if you know this, but like obviously we've had a couple large cultural moments of returning to the theater, Barbenheimer being like the largest one, where it just seemed like it was this sort of exuberant moment of like, oh, we're going to the theater again. And I wish I had like numbers to this, but like, has the tail been positive on that? Like, do you know if that was kind of like an aberrant spike and then it went back, or kind of was people are like, oh, we like going to the movies again, and there was kind of an uplift after that?
Well, I mean, let's look at this year alone. Inside Out 2, I believe, is the highest grossing animated film ever at the box office. I want to say Deadpool versus Wolverine is the highest box office R-rated movie of all time. And just this Thanksgiving weekend was the biggest box office in Thanksgiving weekend history, between Wicked, Gladiator 2 and Moana 2. So I think there's pretty strong evidence that people will go back to the theater. What are they going to go back to the theater for, I think, is the more important question.
Interesting. Where are you seeing green shoots in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned some of them. I think the box office performance, I mean, if you, and look, there's inevitably there will be people who say, yes, but they're all sequels and they're based on IP, and that's true. But let's focus on what is positive here for a moment. People are going back to the theater. Now the question is, what will they go back for? How do we get them to go back for the thing that you want to make? I also think that, we've seen in the last 2 months, it might even be less than that, 3 massive spec sales, maybe 4 actually. We saw, I believe it was Julia Cox sold a script for over $1 million. There was another script that sold for $3 million. I believe there's another that sold as part of a package deal that was over $1 million. And the other script, Clean Break, which was, we're very proud that was a script that was sort of discovered by the reps on the Blacklist website, sold to Searchlight with Ridley Scott producing. So the spec market seems to be heading back as well, which is interesting, and those are definitely green shoots. And I think this goes to the bigger point that I really hope people think about. One of the challenges of being a writer is that you're writing your thing, and you're hoping that to get somebody's attention and that someone invests in it, right? Like that is fundamentally the challenge. There's also an upside, which is that you can do the thing without anybody else's permission, right? Like you can, like a director can't direct without some resources and some people. An actor needs something to say and someone to direct them. But a writer, you can literally go somewhere and write something, and no one can stop you. And there's an opportunity in writing something that is, on its face commercial, that people will say, oh, I read this and I understand that I can make it for less money, that if there's an audience larger than what I can make it for. If you do that, there is an opportunity, but it has to be exceptional. Like it really does need to be flat out something that not everybody, but most people read and say, oh my God, I have to tell other people about this because there's an opportunity here. And I think it's really important to think about like doing all the things. There's what do you want to write as a writer, but it's for that to become the thing that you want it to become, a lot of other people have to get involved and get excited about it. What is it that is going to excite them about what it is that you're writing?
That's interesting, because one thing I like to talk to writers about is when you're kind of formulating that and trying to figure out what the exciting thing is, to think about like telling the story of your script to a friend, and like in a way that would make them excited. Like you just saw something great and you're telling someone, and like thinking about your movie that way, like how would you tell this to someone in a way that would make them excited for that? And like, if you can do that, you're on your way to a story that has that sort of element that other people can then excitedly tell someone about. They're like, oh, I saw this thing. And, you kind of can get that word of mouth a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, one way that I think about it, I tweeted about this a while ago, and Sarah Polley liked it, and I feel like that's about as good of an endorsement as I can hope for. One way to think about it is like, imagine if the trailer for your movie dropped. Which of your group chats is going to light up and say, oh my God, we have to go see this, if they didn't know that you had written it, right? Like, and I'm not saying it's a specific group chat. We're all in many, many different group chats. We all have many different groups of friends, and there are a near infinite number of them worldwide. Like, what group chats are going to light up like crazy when your trailer drops? And if you can't tell me which group chats there are, I'm going to wonder, is there an audience for your movie? And that can be any group chat. That can be your church group chat from back home. That could be your high school friends. It could be your like crazy, intense horror fans that love the hard stuff. Like, which group chats are going to light up when the trailer for this drops? Because if you don't have that, then what are you doing?
I think that's really interesting, because that's a way, I think, kind of answering this question about, we hear all the time about undeniable script sample. What are the hallmarks of a well, actually, no, this is the opposite of that. I'm going to read this question as what I thought it was when I glanced at the chat, and then we can answer the real question. What I thought this was saying, what are the hallmarks of an undeniable script? And one of those I would say is like a way to think about it is, in a way, because it's very difficult to pin down what exactly it is. That's sort of the beauty of art. But that another way of looking at it is thinking about those group chats and be like, who would respond to this? Are there people out there who would get excited about this idea?
Yeah, it's that. I mean, look, there's two sort of parts of this, right? There's the idea and the trailer, and then there's the execution, right? So there's the trailer, which is based on what the thing is, people's like snap impressions of it. Are they going to be excited about it? Right? If they didn't know you were involved, you can't free ride your personal relationships to get people excited about your thing. It needs to be something that they're excited on, based on the thing itself.
That's what Matar is looking for here. His family group chats.
I was like, you're avoiding the critical element of this is they don't know you wrote it. What group chats light up because of the trailer? And then there's the second part, which is, what are the character traits of an undeniable or a deniable script? I think, I'm not sure. I would never think about it that way, because I think that the second I mention a characteristic of an undeniable script, I'll see that trait in a very deniable script. And the second I say a trait that makes something deniable, I'll see someone have that in a script and just be like, I don't care. This is amazing. Right. And so I think it's the way I think about things. And when I'm reading something, I'm hoping every time I open page 1 that the rest of the world ceases to exist as soon as I go to page 2. And all I care about is these people or these things, whatever, whoever the characters are. All I care about is what happens to them. And I am ripping through pages to find out what happens to the people that I got introduced to in this script. And I'll know that something is special when I finish reading the script, and I'm a little sad that I can't spend more time in that world with those characters. And at that point, if I start to feel that as a producer, that's when I start to say, okay, how do I figure this out? If I were to get this made, how much would it cost to make this? Is there an audience for it? But first, I want to know that like I'm the audience for it, that I had a response to it, right? And if I know that I have a response to it, I can reasonably assume that somebody else will. And now I got to figure out who those people are, how many of them are there, and how much will it cost to make the thing. And then the next step is, who do I make it with? Who will see this the way that I do, so that we can all go make it together?
It's interesting when you were talking about the world ceasing to exist and then the feeling when you're done, like that feeling of heartache when you finish something is so real. Like I feel that when I finish a great script or a show or a book or something, and you have that sort of sadness that you can't spend more time in that world. And like, it is a form of heartache. And I feel like that's sometimes why I go back and rewatch, or my favorite shows, because I just need to spend time with these people that I miss, like
that's the thing. None of this is different from our experience watching a movie or watching a television show, right? Like, we all know the difference between a good and a great movie, right? And I'm going to steal from Chris Rock here for a second. I was at a Q&A once, and someone asked him, like, how do you know that you're gonna, become involved in a script when you're reading it? He said, listen, I can't answer that perfectly. He's like, but if I'm hungry and I'm reading your script and my wife offers me a sandwich and I go have a sandwich, I'm not coming back to your script, right? And I think that, and the same thing is true when we go see a movie. You go see a movie, there are movies that you'll say, you know what? I'm gonna go get popcorn. Let me know what happens. I'll be right back. Same thing with TV. I'm on my phone, I pause it, whatever. And then there are things that we watch, and we might need to go to the bathroom. We may be hungry. We're watching till the end. We're sprinting out of the theater the second that it's over, right? It's the same thing with screenplays, right? That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the thing that makes me say, this is the only thing I'm doing until this thing is over, and I'm sad when it's over. And now the only way I can get that taste back is by finding a way to continue to work on this thing, right? So that I can make it into something that people have the same experience with that I just did when I read it in script form.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's awesome. I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the industry side and then get back, because I love this conversation talking about writers. I have a question from an indie filmmaker whose first feature hit streamers this fall. He's working on another one. And they asked, how do you feel about the fortunes of the indie film industry, specifically writing for indie films? There was this moment of opportunity for indie films after the strikes shut down the pipeline from the studios, where it seemed like they had to turn to indies. And this person is kind of worried about that being shut off, kind of if the studios are catching up and getting their pipelines going. What do you feel about that, the pipeline for indie films moving over the next couple of years?
I don't have the numbers in front of me. Like, I don't know how much money is being invested in indie film and how that's changed over the last 5 to 10 years. I wish I did. I'm not sure that anybody's ever put together those numbers specifically. I think it'd be, if the first thing you have to do is define indie film. Is something that gets financed outside of the system and it ends up at Neon, is that indie? Is something that gets financed outside of the system and then gets sold into Universal, is that indie? Is Jason Blum indie, right? Like, defining terms is critically important here. But I also think that I'm not sure it should matter to a writer. I think that the goal, first and foremost, is to write something that is great, that moves people, that has an audience larger than the cost of its budget. And once you have that, then it doesn't really matter where the money comes from or how much money there is out there for other people. What matters is, can you find the money for your project? So yeah, it might be harder, but there's going to be money there. There's going to be an indie film marketplace. movies are going to get produced. And the real question is why should someone give you their money to go make your movie? Are you going to come back with more? Or are they going to feel okay with your not coming back with more because the movie is so good that it's okay that they lost some of that money, if not all of it? Like, that's the fundamental equation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I feel like, in a conversation like this, like IP is a topic that comes off, and people are sort of, if they don't have IP backed stories, or, kind of worried that it's not going to stand out, people are going to be hesitant to get involved. Do you sense an appetite for original stories, or do you think they're going to take a backseat to IP driven content?
Well, I mean, I think inherent in this question is an assumption that like Hollywood used to make original material and now only makes IP, right? Is there sort of that assumption? Can I reasonably assume that?
I don't want to say what is in Ross Lynn's heart, but I think that.
All right, I can see Roslyn's been mixing it up in the comments. Roslyn, do you want to clarify your question? Like, is the sort of premise here that Hollywood used to make original movies and now only makes IP based stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can see. You can answer what you would. I think sometimes there's a delay a little.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So I guess.
Yeah.
So my position on this is that Hollywood has always relied on IP for its movies. I mean, think about the first big blockbusters, Birth of a Nation, Gone with the Wind. Those are adaptations of novels. I know a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's different now. And yeah, I think it's probably a little bit worse now. But, if you go back and look 25 years ago at the top 30 films, I think 21 of them were based on some sort of IP, either original stories, novels, foreign films, or remakes and sequels. And I think that's, a little worse, but not that different now. I think it's important to remember why the industry is interested in IP, right? The industry is interested in IP because they need to sell the thing to an audience. And if the thing already has some familiarity or a built-in fan base, it will be easier to sell it to an audience. So the overcome you have with original material is, what is the audience for this original material? How are you going to convince them to watch it? And if you have an answer for that with your original material, then it's going to be easier to sell it. If that seems like a harder argument to make, it's going to be harder to sell it. But again, it's not because it's original or because it's not original. It's because there's no built-in audience. And the equation that the other side is trying to figure out is, how do I pay for the thing and then sell it to an audience that's larger than what it costs for me to make?
Interesting. Obviously, another topic that's on a lot of people's minds right now is AI. There's a question here from Sylvester who asked us very early. So sorry, Sylvester, for not getting to this sooner. If you could travel back in time and you were just starting out becoming an upcoming screenwriter, how would you prepare yourself in this modern world of artificial intelligence?
The same way I prepare myself for a world prior to artificial intelligence. I'd become the best writer I can, the best emotional storyteller I can. And that would probably mean, and this is the advice that I give and have given for years, is to consume as much storytelling as possible. Read everything, read the greats, read the not so greats, watch everything, watch the greats, not watch the not so greats. And I'll steal from Scott Myers, who's the official screenwriting blogger for the Blacklist. He does go into the story, read scripts, watch movies, write pages. And then beyond that, like, have some lived emotional experience that, not to be crass about it, but that you can mine because you want to say something about what it means to be human. The thing that is, one of my favorite signs from the WGA strike was AI doesn't have childhood trauma, right? And I loved it because it sort of speaks to where art comes from, which is sort of a fundamental wrestling with what it means to be a human being, and trying to share ideas or thoughts or feelings about what it means to be a human being. And I think that if you focus on that part and focus on the craft of the thing, that really hasn't changed in a world of AI. Look, I may eat my words in 10 years because I don't think anybody knows exactly where we're headed, but I don't see the existence of AI changing what it means to write a great story. which at the end of the day is the thing that people are still desperate to find and acquire because there's money to be made.
One of the places we're seeing AI so far, or at least hearing rumors of AI, is in the reading and evaluation of scripts. People are saying that they have this service where it'll give you, it'll basically do coverage on a script and take out the human element of it. But is there one, how much of that do you think is really happening? And two, what do you think the impact of that will be, in the sense that, like, if it's AI reading the script and it can't recognize that human element that makes it special, is it going to, is there potential for it, scripts with that not being bought, or like with it being lost because this sort of machine is choosing things that it can recognize, in a sense, not what a human reader would perhaps pick up on or resonate with?
Yeah, I mean, look, why would you want to remove the human element of reading is my first question.
Cheaper, it would be my,
well,
pay the AI would be my answer.
Yeah, and Bronny James is cheaper than LeBron. I would rather have LeBron on my team. I think fundamentally, if the industry ever shifts to exclusively AI evaluation of material, I will go raise $1 billion and use humans to evaluate it, and I will dog walk the competition. I just think fundamentally, like, sure, it's cheaper, but someone's going to be smart enough to use a better tool to evaluate and find good material, and they're going to make better work than you do. So yeah, like, I think people are definitely using it. Look, I know that there are writers. I've seen people talk about it on Reddit who are like, "Yeah, I upload my script to ChatGPT and then I get feedback." I wouldn't recommend doing that. I think that's a terrible idea. If only because, fundamentally what generative AI is trying to predict the next word, right? On some level. And it's also a backwards looking technology. It's taking everything that's come before and saying, okay, what's the next thing? And I think that, again, what great art is not necessarily just like a continuation of a line. It's usually a jump forward or a completely unexpected movement that makes people sit up and say, "Oh my God, this is amazing! I'm feeling this." So again, I just don't. I think it would be real folly to rely too heavily on that at all. Because I think the human subjective nature of this thing is the valuable thing. It is the entire thing.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. And let's kind of pivot a little bit more to that human element, because we have an audience of a lot of screenwriters right here who want to have careers, who want to get things made, want to make money, there's nothing wrong with that.
There absolutely is not.
So one question that a couple people liked in here, I want to bring this, is Tony Bada Bing, which fun name. As a new screenwriter, should I swing for the fences with a big budget or shoot lower budget? Does smaller budget give you a better shot at being made with everything else being equals? I would say, yeah, I think this is asking for writing a script for a larger budget film versus writing a script for a smaller budget film. Does that have an impact in it getting sold, made,
I mean, if your big budget film has a massive, obvious audience, then yes, swing for the fences. If that's your idea, if you have an idea that justifies a big budget. If you don't have an idea that justifies a big budget, then you need to write something that's so good that it'll get somebody to invest a smaller budget in it. I think the reality is getting any money is hard. So you got to swing for the fences, whatever budget it is, and really ask yourself, like, what's the best script you can write? Right? Like, there's a big difference between writing a $300 million space epic and a $300,000 intimate family drama. And one of those you're probably going to be better at than the other. And whatever it is that you can write best is the thing that you should write first. And the reason I say that is because most scripts are not going to get made, right? Most scripts, even if you attract the attention of industry professionals, are not going to get made. They're going to be the sample that gets you the next job or the opportunity for a conversation with someone who helps you brainstorm the next job. So write the thing that you can write best. Try to give some real thought to who the audience is and make sure that the thing, has a larger audience than the price that it costs to make it. But what can you write best, and what are you going to be most excited to invest all of that time and energy in writing and writing well?
That's interesting. I was having a conversation with a screenwriter friend who recently had broken in and was starting to get a lot of work on big studio projects. And I asked him, what was your sample? What was the thing that that got you noticed? And it was so funny because the look on his face, he was very ashamed kind of the thing. Like I was like, oh, I want to read it. And he didn't want to send it to me. And he's like, it's not good. And I was like, what do you mean it's not good? It's gotten you work. You're working with huge things right now. And what we kind of were unpacking got to the bottom of was that it wasn't good formally. It didn't necessarily, like, there were some problems with it. You know, it didn't necessarily look right in some ways. But what we got down to is that what it had was a great voice, and it had a great energy behind it. And I think that's really important in when you're writing your script that you're trying to get noticed, is like, you're trying to market yourself a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so what are you offering to the marketplace? Because all the execs know 100 writers who can write a perfect script, formatted, etc., whatever. But what they don't have maybe is that little spark that's you, right? Like, so really, I think a lot of times people kind of focus on the idea of like writing a perfect script or something, when really what perfect means is something that's going to get people excited and want to work with you.
Yeah, I don't know what a perfect script is. Because the concept is just doesn't make sense to me. Because it's like, again, first, because it's the fundamentally subjective nature of the thing. Like, some people are not going to like your perfect script. Does that mean it's not perfect? And if so, could there ever be a perfect script? I think, I'm trying to think about the best way to talk about this. Look, it is extremely, it requires, like, there are very few working professional screenwriters. You know, if you think about the numbers of people that get into the WGA every year for writing a feature script, we're talking about like fewer than the number of people that are drafted into most professional sports leagues. We all know how hard you have to work, how good you have to be to get into the NBA, to get into the NFL, right? And I think some people just think that, oh, I'll just, like, you know, write a screenplay and that it'll happen for me. The people who are doing this stuff professionally are wildly talented and put in a ton of work. And if that's something that you want to do, if you want to be one of the very small people that earns the right to do this stuff, it requires an incredible amount of work. And that doesn't mean that just because you do the work, you're guaranteed an opportunity. A lot of people play basketball, don't ever get within spitting distance of the NBA. But that's like the minimum, right? And then, look, I also think we have to be honest about the fact that there are significantly greater overcomes for people who don't have access by birth, who don't have access by certain legacies, and that makes it even harder. But regardless, you got to figure out a way to write something that makes people say, oh my God, I have to tell everybody about this, right? And that is a hard thing to do. It is a very, 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 very high standard.
How much market watching do you think screenwriters should do in terms of deciding what to write? Like what seems hot right now, or what there seems to be an appetite for in terms of scripts being bought?
I think screenwriters should be watching movies and television. I think they should be reading novels and nonfiction. I don't think they should care very much about the market for spec scripts. I think that the question is not what sold last week. The question is, what can I write that has a massive audience and a comparatively lower cost that will make people say, oh my God, I have to tell everybody about this. If you do that, the rest will take care of itself. But, you know, studying, oh, well, Warner Brothers bought this for this much money and Paramount bought this for this much money last week, other than just knowing that, yes, people are buying. There's a lot of money being thrown around, as we've seen over the last few weeks. Know that that's true, and then go write something that will make people throw that money at you.
One of those common questions I get in these Q&As, which makes a lot of sense, is people want to know how you get people to read scripts. And I want to get that in a minute, but I first want to go back a step, where how does a writer know that their script is strong enough to start sending out to people? How do you know it's ready to, you know, start putting all that effort behind?
I think you share it with people who you can reasonably assume have some familiarity with what a good script looks like. And ideally people who are already in the industry. And when those people are telling you consistently, this is amazing, I want to share it with this other person I know, then you know you're onto something. When a person tells you, I really like your script, but doesn't volunteer to like share it, that's a soft pass, right? When someone really, really loves something, they will come to you and say, I love this. Who do you want me to send it to? What do you need from me? How can I be helpful, right? I would like to talk to you further about it. How can I get involved? That's what real enthusiasm about a piece of material looks like. How can we keep talking, right? I liked it. That's a person being kind, usually, right? So if you can find people who are in the industry or peripheral to the industry like that, and they're giving you that response, then it's probably time to like really invest in it, right? The other way, and again, not everybody has access to people like that, right? So if you don't have access to people like that, then you need to find other people. Maybe it's via the internet, maybe it's through forums like this, maybe it's through the Blacklist. And again, I want to be very careful about how I talk about it, because I think we're here to have a conversation about the state of the screenwriting industry. I'm not here to advertise the Blacklist. But I will say, I built the Blacklist to address exactly this problem. It is designed so that people can get feedback from people who know what the market looks like. If that feedback is not great, you can say, okay, I'm going to stop giving the Blacklist my money. I'm going to do a rewrite. And then only when I've exhausted all of the free ways to make this thing better, then I'm going to invest another little bit of money to get feedback and see how it goes. But when the feedback is extremely positive, then we start telling everybody, right? Because we have the credibility within the industry that when we say, hey, this is something worth paying attention to, other people will then pay attention to it. So I'm trying to model that, oh my God, I have to tell everybody thing within the infrastructure of a tech platform, with reputable readers and the ability for writers to say, hey, I don't think this person actually read my script. Can you look into this, right? And that's why we exist. But again, I want to be cautious about that, and I understand that people may have some concerns about it. I think it's really important that people do their research in the Blacklist and make a decision about how to spend your money, as an informed decision. But that is literally why it exists.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's interesting because people always kind of ask me, like, do I recommend or what do I recommend? And it's like, I say, I can't answer for you. I don't know what your financial situation is. I don't know what your priorities are in your life. That's a question that you kind of have to answer for yourself. One thing
here's the thing. I do recommend the Blacklist. I made it, but sure. I would say point blank, even to people who want to use the Blacklist, if you're already excited about using the Blacklist, great. Still exhaust every free resource at your disposal to make the script as good as it possibly can be before spending money on it on the Blacklist or anywhere else. Otherwise, you are just throwing good money after bad. So if you have no friends who will read a screenplay and no one who will give you feedback, then look, do all the work you can to take it as far as you can, and then consider spending money on the Blacklist. But if you have any friends who can give you feedback for free, take them up on it before spending money on it. It seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah, no, I think that's important. It's one thing I also like to tell people is that you have to do work yourself before other people are going to be able to help you. Like, I think there's sometimes people, they finish a draft of a script and they put so much into it that they're just like, all right, someone else take this, but if it's got a lot of issues, I guess I always say your readers need to know what you're trying to do in order to help you get there or help you accomplish it. So you kind of have to put in as much work as you can before any advice really is going to help. Because if you give someone something that's just kind of a shambles, like you just did a vomit draft, and that's fine. I think vomit drafts are great. But when you finish a vomit draft, then you have to go back and, do work on it yourself before other people are going to be able to really help you in terms of their feedback.
Well, it depends on who the people are, right? Like, there are definitely writers in my life who, if they said, hey, I wrote a vomit draft, would you take a look and see if there's anything there? I would read it the night they sent it to me, right? Because we've established a long-term creative partnership, and I'm a big fan of their work, and so I'm happy to help them. everybody has friends who are willing to do that for them, right? And so it's legitimate to say, hey, I wrote a vomit draft. Will you read this? If you have a relationship like that, right? And you should do that because a sounding board is important in the same way that you would, sit next to a friend at a bar and tell them the story of your script just to get feedback on that. So I think that's totally fair, but I think it's really important that like you should still be the hardest working person in that dynamic, right? So you wrote the vomit draft, they're going to give you feedback, like take them out for a drink, buy them a nice little gift as a thank you, right? Make them feel like you appreciate their time, not like they have the obligation to read it. And then by the time you ask them to read it again, you should have put a heck of a lot of work in making it a lot better, and so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. And I think that's like you can create really productive, creative working relationships if you can recognize the value of other people's time and labor, and then honor it by really doing the work before asking for their time again.
Yeah, and you could also do the work in returning the favor, in reading their work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Honestly, I think, I highly recommend writers groups because I think it's so much easier to see things in other people's work than it is in your own work when you're so close to it. You learn so much more reading other scripts and even the problems in other scripts and like helping find a solution in that script. And then you're like, oh, I saw something. Whereas we're so close to our own work, it can be very difficult sometimes to really see things.
And also like those are two largely different skills, if we're being honest, right? Like I have spent 20 years learning how to read scripts and give feedback on them. And I'll be the first to say that not all of my ideas are good ones, but I'm a heck of a lot better at improving scripts than I am in writing them, in part because I've never written one, right? But that is a skill in the same way that coaching is a skill that differs from playing. And so I think it's really important that that people just acknowledge these realities and think about them in the context of their working relationships and their own work so that they can make their work as good as humanly possible, but also be a productive, joyous, creative partner to the people that they're working with. Because here's the thing, you may be writing the thing alone, but if you want to get your thing made, you want to have a professional career, it's a lot of working with other people. And being able to be a productive, creative partner is a large part of the job, as much, if not more, than having a fire pen.
Speaking of creative partners, how do I go about seeking representation? So this particular question, he's got several scripts in his portfolio, but I think you can also answer this more broadly on what kind of tips do you have in seeking representation, and at what point in a writer's development should they seek representation?
I'll be honest with you. And again, this is a difficult position for me because I think even attempting to give an unbiased answer, I think the answer here is the Blacklist website. But I'll try to answer it first by saying, again, make sure that, first of all, you have several completed copywritten scripts. Great. You need to figure out which is the one that is the best one, the one that you would bet your career on, because in many ways, every time you send it out, you are. So what's the one that you are most proud of that you think is the most face-meltingly good script? First, figure that out. 2, make sure it's as good as it humanly possibly could be. Again, exhaust all free resources at your disposal to make that thing as good as it can be. At that point, if I was in your position, I would host it on the Blacklist website and purchase feedback on it. Take the feedback, see how it goes. If it's an 8 out of 10 or better, we're going to start telling people, including a lot of agents and managers, hey, this is a really good script. You should do something with it. But that's also producers, talent, et cetera, et cetera. And then if the feedback is not good, then you got to take stock and say, is this one person who didn't like it? Am I sure that it's really good? Do I want to pay for more feedback? Do I want to ask for some free additional opinions before I spend any more money on it? But again, literally the reason we built the Blacklist website was because there was no answer to this question. And I got tired of not having a good answer to it. And I recognized that it's bad for writers that the industry doesn't have a good answer to that question. It is worse for the industry if there is talent out in the world that we can't find, because then we are unable to profit from it. I use the analogy, I keep going back to NBA analogies here, but imagine if the NBA said, oh, you want to be a professional basketball player, move to New York City, our headquarters are in Midtown, play basketball on courts near our headquarters, someone will probably see you, or, and then network until someone pays attention to you. That is essentially what we tell screenwriting talent. Move to LA, network on the internet, etc. That's ridiculous, completely ridiculous. And the Blacklist was built to solve that problem.
How do you feel about people using new media, Twitter, having a funny TikTok, web series, all these sort of pathways
if you can do it, great. Look, there are many very talented people who have leveraged these platforms and leveraged an identity on them and their talent on them to attract the attention of people who can help their career. And more power to you. Do it if you can. But not everybody wants to be up on TikTok all day. Not everybody best expresses themselves or is comfortable on social media platforms that don't protect them. And there's some communities that are particularly vulnerable on those and don't necessarily feel comfortable being their full selves in the context of a wholly public forum. So if you're not one of those people, you got to find another way in. And I also think that it's a very narrow pathway, like being funny on TikTok, but it does exist. And so if you can figure that out, by all means, do it.
Awesome. In terms of like people's querying, or trying to get their work out there, do you recommend like trying to get representation first before like trying to send an email to a producer, or to someone like you when you were working as an executive at Leonardo DiCaprio's company, would you have read a script someone sent with you, or would they have needed a rep first for you to read that?
I mean, all right, here's the reality. Most people are not reading queries. I think if you have a query that for some reason is just like inspires morbid or excited curiosity, maybe somebody responds and says, "This sounds amazing. I have to read it." But you probably don't have that script and you probably don't have that query. What makes people read scripts is really just it's if they believe the script is going to be good. And so how are you going to convince people that your script is good? You're going to convince people that your script is good 9 times out of 10 by somebody else saying that it was good. So who's that person going to be? For most people who are working professionals in the industry, it's a representative. They have an agent or manager who read something at some point that made them say, "I love this person's writing. I think I want to represent them and help them build their career. I think I can make money doing that," right? Most working professionals have that person. You also have people that are working professionals in the industry as producers or executives, and they've read your work, and even without you knowing about it, they're sharing it because it's good, right? That's how the Blacklist came into being, was industry executives, in addition to getting things from agents and managers, they're sharing stuff amongst themselves. "Hey, this is a good script. You should check it out. This is a writer you should look into hiring. Oh, I need a list of writers that can do X, Y, or Z." That's how you find out. So like, again, third-party validation, that's how these scripts are getting read. And again, the last, I hate to keep hitting this, the Blacklist is a third-party validator that the industry does trust. So not only do we amplify the visibility of material that gets high scores from our readers, because our readers are industry professionals, but if you are querying and say, "Hey, I wrote a script, this is what it is, it got 5 8s on the Blacklist. 8s are pretty rare, 3.5% of the feedback that they give. You can download it. Here's the link right here." That's a more interesting thing than, "Hey, I have this script. Doesn't the logline sound good?" Right? Because you have a third-party validator saying, "Well, these other people really liked it, so you might like it too." And again, that's the same dynamic that the annual Blacklist functions on. Here, the scripts on this list were among the favorites of X number of people. Maybe it might be your favorite as well.
I will also say that, and this is with the caveat that I know not everyone can do it. If you can work in the industry, it is probably still the best way, because that's where you meet people who can pass scripts on. Most of the people that I know who have had, success that I kind of came up with worked as assistants. I started as a PA. People started as PA assistants on TV shows or at management agencies or productions or networks. And that is a path. It's not the easiest path. It doesn't pay very well, and not everyone can do it. Not everyone can move here. So I understand that. But if you can, that still is a good way to start building those connections that can, over the years, you kind of rise with other people, and you have people to pass your scripts on to, and become advocates.
That's definitely a thing. But I would say, if I was a aspiring professional writer And I was choosing between coming to Los Angeles and making not a lot of money in a very expensive city. And my goal was to be a writer. And I had to choose between coming to Los Angeles and spending and not making a lot of money, working very hard in a very expensive city, and going somewhere where I could keep my costs low and get a job that would not occupy most of my time and mental energy. And I could focus on becoming the best damn writer that I could. And I knew that if I could upload my script to the Blacklist and get high scores on it, that hundreds of people would download it. I'd probably, focus on the writing. And I think that, like, at the end of the day, whether or not it's true that it may be helpful to know other people in the business and work as an assistant for however long before someone's willing to read your script, it shouldn't be like that. And I think the industry loses when we rely on social networks to guide hiring decisions and not on an actual meritocracy based on the quality of the work.
Interesting. I think that's a good point to end the formal interview. Franklin, we have some more questions that have been asked over time. Do you have a few more minutes to?
Yeah, I've got another 10 minutes before I go to bed.
All right, great. This was kind of a fun. I don't know if you would know the answer to this, but this is something I've kind of always wondered. Strange arcane question: how does a public-based streamer like Canopy survive? What's the economic model for them?
Douglas, I'd like to say, first of all, that, like, literally this is my nightmare of a question, because I feel like I should know the answer, but I don't. I do feel like, fortunately, Google exists and must, somewhere deep in the links, have an answer, and it's probably one that I will find myself asking a search engine in the immediate future. So thank you for asking it, because I don't know the answer, but now I'm very curious.
Yeah, I just love the shout out to Canopy, which I love because
it's a great app. By the way,
depending on where you live, and if you have a library card, you may have free access to it, which is awesome to get free things, and libraries are awesome too. So you should look into your library to see if they have a program connecting to Canopy.
I'll just also say this is one of the ways in which I'm just profoundly jealous of people who are coming of age now. When I was a kid in Columbus, Georgia in the 90s, my only two sources of my three sources of movies would have been like HBO, Cinemax, the movie theater, of which there were two Carmack cinemas who were only playing studio films, and Blockbuster. And it wasn't like there was a massive, foreign film or independent film section at my local Blockbuster in West Central Georgia. And now, no matter where you are, if you have a Wi-Fi connection, you have pretty much the entire history of cinema at your disposal. And I'm personally really excited about a generation that's going to come up with access to everything, and an education that would far outstrip literally any current working professional's education by their early 20s, and also be sort of functional with filmic language born of having a camera in their pocket that would have cost me several $1,000s 25 years ago. So again, I think there's a lot of reasons for, like, real green shoots here. And I think it's really important that people sort of focus on those.
It's kind of interesting you mentioned the camera in the pocket thing. I was kind of curious, like, in 20 years, are we going to have like vertical portrait films? The aspect ratio, is the language of filmmaking going to change significantly because of that?
I would suspect that the general language of filmmaking is not going to change significantly. Will there be a film in a vertical orientation in the next decade that challenges our assumptions about that? I would hope so. Like, I hope somebody comes in with a movie shot vertically that makes everybody say, "Damn, well, huh?" Right? Like that. Like, aren't we all hoping for that? Like, to see something that we were not expecting, that moved us and expanded our idea of what is possible. Like, I think that's kind of the holy grail.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. Speaking of the future, Thomas wants to know: do you foresee Blacklist producing film in the future?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a little bit of that. I think that to varying success, I would say. I think the reality of it is that it's very difficult to be an independent producer right now. I think that I've realized in the last several years that we can have more impact and impact more movies in a significantly greater way by focusing on building the best platform possible and the best programs around that platform possible than necessarily producing individual movies. But at the same time, people come to me from a lot of times and say, hey, I'm not getting traction on this thing. I think you'll like it. Would you like to be involved? And if it's something that I get really excited about, then of course. I mean, look, I'm still my holy grail, my white whale is to find the great soccer movie. You know, and for me, the high water mark remains Bend It Like Beckham. But I want like the big, emotional, proper football epic. If somebody had that script, I'd produce it in a second, right? So I think it's really about, I think my work, the work of the Blacklist, is to identify and celebrate great writing. We do that in whatever way that we can. I think that the best way to celebrate great writing is to make it real. So when we have the opportunity to do that, and we are of the greatest value to, and not like, I wouldn't want to be in a position where I said, hey, I'd like to produce this thing. And the writer said, well, Plan B also wants to produce it. I was like, well, you shouldn't produce it with them. You should produce it with me. Like, Plan B is a better, like, they're really good producers and they have a really good track record. So go produce it with Plan B. Let me watch it without having to make it, right? But if there's a place where I or the Blacklist can be of significant value and the writer agrees and any partners agree, then yeah, we definitely be involved. But again, I think we want to be responsible, productive, creative partners. We don't want to be free writing stuff that we have no business trying to extract things from.
Nice. I'm going to have you on in the future and we can just talk soccer for 90 minutes.
Oh, you have opened a door that I don't think you want to open.
Oh, I'm a degenerate soccer fan.
That is literally how I describe myself.
Yeah. No, yeah. I actually fell down, but I had an LAFC scarf up there for a while that used to be in my
I'm an LAFC season ticket holder.
Yeah.
I think, hang on. There's some football stuff behind here somewhere.
Yeah,
we'll
get into that.
We'll get into it.
Not now. Here's a question. Just for on the Blacklist side of thing. When are we having more Word by Word with Ed Solomon, which is the podcast that Blacklist produces, right, with screenwriter Ed Solomon?
Yeah. Basically what happened was during the writer's strike, Ed tweeted, funnily enough, right before the Champions League final. Ed tweeted that he's like, hey, if I started an online workshop for screenwriters, would anybody attend? And I slid into those DMs and said, yes, they would. And I've got a team that can handle the infrastructure for it. My only thing is that none of us should be getting paid for it because it's the middle of a strike. So I'm going to connect you to my team. Let's make it happen. And 10 days later, we launched a podcast, a series of Zoom seminars that were free to attend. We asked everybody to attend to make at least a small donation to the writers' support funds. So the fund supporting WGA writers who were affected by the strike, but also the funds that were supporting support staff and below the line folks who were negatively affected by the strike. And we ran off a series of like a couple dozen conversations with everyone from J.J. Abrams to Judd Apatow to Boots Riley to Charlie Kaufman to Lena Dunham, Tracy Oliver. It was a great series of conversations. So just as a context for people who weren't familiar. Ed had a baby. We will be back in the new year at some point. But, you know, after the strike ended, Ed is a very in-demand writer. And so he had to go back to work. But I know that he cares very, very deeply about sharing his knowledge and gathering together other writers to share their knowledge. And it'll be back, but it'll be back at the right time. And, you know, we're very busy. Ed's very busy, but it will come back. I promise.
Awesome. It also looked like Sandra might be an LAFC fan here in the comments.
It was a tough playoffs. It was really awful.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the team rebuilds. I feel like our midfield needs a massive overhaul moving forward.
I agree.
But I think that's it. I would love to just leave with any parting words of wisdom, advice, however you want to interpret it. Just kind of what would your final word be to our audience of aspiring and perhaps some working screenwriters watching us right now? Yeah.
So here's the thing. Times are weird. I don't think I need to tell anybody that. And I think times are hard. And I think there's a lot of reason. Like, I understand the fear and I understand the anxiety. There is a contraction happening. There's a lot of fears about AI, and understandably so. And at the same time, there's a massive amount of opportunity, right? It's never been easier if you have, well, it's never been easier to watch the history of cinema and to educate yourself on writing and how film works and how things get made and how to make something yourself. That has never been easier than it is right now. It has never been easier if you have something great to get it to people who can do something with it. That's a fact, no matter who you are, right? And it is also true, and it will always be true, that when you write something great that has a business model behind it, where there is an audience for it, it can be made for a price that is below the cost it is to make it, there is opportunity there. And these big spec sales over the last couple of weeks show that. What I'd ask is, I think it's really important to remember that watching movies, watching TV, these are things that really do bind us together as like humankind and really inform the way we see ourselves and the way we see each other. And it is almost religious, certainly ritualistic, when we think about like going to a movie theater every Friday night or watching a TV show every week. And then having, and especially with, movie theaters, you're going to a physical space and sitting next to someone you don't know while someone tells you a story about what it means to be human. Like, that's what I did in church every Sunday in West Central Georgia when I was a kid, right? It is literally a religious experience on some level, and it's an incredibly powerful one. There was this interview, so it's a sacred responsibility, right? And I remember this interview with Tupac Shakur shortly before he was killed, and he was asked, Tupac, do you think your music will change the world? He's like, no, I think that's kind of a ridiculous question. But I do think that my music will change the minds that change the world. And so I think it's really important to remember that like the impact of what you make and share as a filmmaker, even if it's just to 10,000 people, it's unquantifiable, the effect that you have on the way that they see the world, but it's also undeniable in aggregate. And so it's really important that you ask yourself, like, what stories am I trying to tell? How am I trying to make people feel? How am I trying to make them see themselves? How am I making them trying to see the people in their lives, the people they're sitting next to in the theater, the people that they will see the next morning when they're on their commute after watching the TV show that I wrote, right? And that doesn't mean you have to be super serious. It doesn't mean that you have to like try to, say something really important. Maybe it means you just make people laugh a lot. Maybe it means that you make people feel really, really good because it makes it a little bit easier for them to survive all the other hard stuff that we have to endure. Eddie Murphy has said that he's like, yeah, I get asked to, why don't I do more dramas? Like, you're a really good actor. Why don't you do more Oscar movies? He's like, listen, they play my comedies in hospitals, right? When people are ill, when people are grappling with the hardest things in life, they play my comedies. And so I think it's important to think about, like, what is it that you are going to write? What stories are you going to tell? How are you going to leave people feeling? What mark are you going to leave on them? Because when you get it right, it leaves a real mark on all of us. And think about the things that have left a mark on you and how they've changed how you see yourself and how they changed how you see the world, what you think is possible, what you think is impossible, who you think is a hero, who you think is a villain. Like, think deeply about that. And really aspire to greatness, because greatness is what it takes. You have to be soaring in whatever you do. Good enough isn't good enough. So like, figure out what that thing is. So yeah, those are my words. That's my time.
That's awesome. That's a fantastic note to end on, Franklin. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to also thank everyone watching. We had an awesome participation in the comments. I love seeing everyone there. I hope everyone is feeling inspired to go out there and do that and dig deep in their writing. I just want to say, if you are looking for a space to write, please feel free to join me Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific at Write With Us. There's a link, arcstudiopro.com/events in the description. It's free. It's open to everyone. We do writing sprints. We talk about writing. It's a really good time. Feel free to come. But with that, we're going to head out. And again, Franklin, thank you so much. And everyone else, be kind to yourselves and happy writing. Farewell.